The sun dipped low over the Sacramento skyline, casting a warm golden glow across the tree-lined streets. James Carter, a 52-year-old black man in a neatly pressed suit, drove his sedan through the quiet evening, the hum of jazz on the radio easing the weight of a long workday. He was a man of routine, meticulous and composed, heading home to his modest ranch-style house in the suburbs. As he slowed at a yellow light, the sudden flash of red and blue in his rearview mirror shattered the calm. A police siren wailed, sharp and insistent. James's jaw tightened, but his hand stayed steady on the wheel. He pulled over, rolling down his window, bracing for what he sensed was more than a routine stop. Out stepped Officer Daniel Hayes, a stocky man in his late 30s with a crew cut and a badge that gleamed under the fading light. Hayes approached with a swagger, his hand resting on his belt, exuding the confidence of someone accustomed to control. License and registration. He barked, his tone clipped, eyes already scanning James with suspicion. James handed over the documents without a word, his movements deliberate, but he felt Hayes's gaze linger, searching for something to justify the stop. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Hayes asked, leaning closer to the window, his voice carrying an edge. James met his eyes calmly. "I'm not sure, officer." I slowed at the light. Hayes's lips twitched. "You didn't come to a complete stop," he said, though his tone wavered, as if the excuse felt flimsy even to him. He glanced at James's license, then back at the man in the suit. "You're not from around here, are you?" James's expression remained neutral. "I moved here 6 months ago. My address is on the license." But Hayes wasn't listening. His questions grew sharper, less about the traffic violation and more about James himself. "Were you headed in such a hurry?" he pressed, stepping closer. "Just home," James replied, his voice steady but firm. The air thickened with tension. Hayes didn't see a driver anymore, saw a suspect, and James knew it. Hayes tucked James's documents into his pocket with exaggerated slowness, his eyes narrowing. "Step out of the car," he ordered. James's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" he asked, his tone measured but pointed. Hayes's face hardened. "I said step out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The threat hung heavy, unspoken but clear. James exhaled, opened the door, and stepped onto the asphalt, standing a head taller than Hayes, his suit crisp, his demeanor unshaken. Hayes gestured toward the car. "Hands where I can see them." James complied, his movements calm, but he turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the officer. "Is this about men in suits driving sedans, or something else?" The question cut through the evening air, sharp and deliberate. Hayes's composure faltered, his hand drifting toward his belt. "Watch your tone," he snapped. James didn't flinch. "I'm just asking for clarity, officer. Transparency, you know." Hayes scoffed, pacing a small circle, clearly rattled by James's calm. "You seem pretty confident," he muttered, almost to himself. "Like you know how this ends." James tilted his head. "Confidence isn't the issue, officer. Respect is." The words landed like a challenge, and Hayes froze, his bravado slipping. For the first time, he sensed he wasn't in control, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Turn around, hands on the hood," Hayes barked. "I need to check for weapons." James raised an eyebrow. "Weapons? Do I look like I'm carrying?" Hayes's jaw clenched. "I'm not asking again." James turned, placing his hands on the car, his face unreadable. Hayes patted him down, his movements rough, lingering, as if trying to provoke a reaction. But James remained still, his silence louder than any protest. "You're clean," Hayes muttered, stepping back, his tone begrudging, frustrated by the lack of evidence. James turned to face him, his eyes sharp. "Of course I am." Hayes bristled. "I'm not done here," he snapped, his voice rising. "You seem to know a lot about what I can do. Care to explain?" James folded his arms, relaxed despite the crackling tension. "I've had my share of stops like this. You learn a thing or two." Hayes stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You a lawyer or something?" James smiled faintly. "Or something." The ambiguity infuriated Hayes. "You think you're smarter than me?" he spat, invading James's space. James met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I believe in fairness, and I'm not seeing it here." Hayes's face reddened. "Fairness? People like you always," he stopped, the words hanging in the air, unfinished but damning. James's expression didn't change, but his voice grew softer, sharper. People like me? Hayes stepped back, realizing he'd crossed a line. You know what I mean, he muttered, but his conviction was gone. James's calm wasn't passive Anna Maria, it was a blade, cutting through pretense. I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago, James said quietly. Hayes opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, he looked uncertain, the ground shifting beneath him. James's voice cut through the silence, steady and unyielding. Officer, it's time you know who I am. Hayes scoffed, but his bravado was hollow. I don't care who you are. James reached into his pocket, slow and deliberate. I'm getting my badge, he said, watching Hayes's hand twitch near his holster. He flipped open a leather wallet, revealing a gleaming badge. James Carter, Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Police Department. Hayes froze, his eyes darting to the badge, then back to James's face, searching for a lie. But James's expression held only quiet authority. Internal Affairs? Hayes repeated, his voice cracking. Yes, James said, stepping forward. My job is to ensure officers uphold the integrity of this badge. Hayes's confidence unraveled, his face paling as he took a step back, his hand falling from his belt. The problem isn't just the profiling, James continued, his voice calm but piercing. It's that you assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I didn't deserve respect. That's not just a problem for me, it's a problem for everyone you encounter. Hayes's shoulders sagged, the weight of James's words crushing him. James stepped closer. Here's what happens next. You return my documents, and you think carefully about what you say. You'll hear from me again, not as a driver, but as the man deciding if you're fit to wear that badge. Hayes's hands trembled as he handed back James's license and registration. James took them, slid into his car, and paused, looking at Hayes one last time. The badge doesn't make you better than anyone, he said. It makes you accountable to everyone. As James drove off, Hayes stood alone, his future uncertain. The next morning, James sat at his desk in the Internal Affairs office, a file open before him. Officer Daniel Hayes. Minor complaints dotted his record: unprofessional conduct, questionable stops, issues swept under the rug. James wasn't surprised. Hayes wasn't unique. He was a symptom of a deeper issue. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Sarah, handed him a stack of reports. Chief Wilson wants you at the department review next week, she said. James nodded. Schedule a meeting with him this afternoon. We need to talk. In the conference room, Chief Wilson, a grizzled veteran, listened as James recounted the stop. Hayes isn't an isolated case, James said. We've been handling these quietly for too long. Quiet doesn't fix anything, it lets it fester. Wilson rubbed his temples. You're proposing a department-wide review? James nodded. Training, protocols, accountability. If we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, the community won't trust us. Wilson leaned forward. This'll stir things up. James met his gaze. It's about time. The weeks that followed were a blur of action. James led meetings, reviewed data, and held public forums, turning the Hayes incident into a catalyst for change. At Hayes's internal hearing, James sat across from him, watching the officer squirm. The suspension was a start, but James's focus was broader, preventing the next Hayes. Months later, at a community event, James stood at a podium, addressing officers, officials, and residents. Justice isn't just about catching criminals, he said. It's about serving with integrity, fairness, and respect. That's the badge we're building. The crowd erupted in applause, but James's work wasn't done. Change was slow, but it was real, and he'd see it through. What did you think of James's story? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially on issues of injustice and accountability in our communities. Where do you stand? Let's start a conversation that matters.